Men like Volkov deserve a bullet. I'd pull the trigger myself. She had no idea Hay was Volkov. Rain lashed the darkened street, turning the cobblestones into treacherous mirrors reflecting the bruised purple sky. Lightning fractured the night, momentarily illuminating the figure staggering through the downpour. Alessio Volkov, known in the city's underbelly as the Ghost, clutched his side. Blood, warm and insistent, seeped through his fingers, diluted by the rain but refusing to be washed away entirely. The meeting with Viktor Kamenev had been a trap, a brutal reminder that even ghosts could bleed. A bullet had grazed his ribs, not fatal but debilitating, and Viktor's hunters were closing in, their shadows merging with the storm. His vision blurred at the edges, each breath a knife twist. Refuge, he needed refuge now. Then he saw it. A single defiant beacon of light piercing the gloom halfway down the deserted block. The daily grind. A coffee shop. Closed, surely, but unlocked. He stumbled towards it, driven by primal instinct, the sleek lines of his ruined, rain-soaked suit clinging to him like a shroud. He pushed the door. It yielded with a soft chime, absurdly cheerful against the storm's fury. The scent hit him first. Rich, roasted coffee beans, warm vanilla, butter, and something deeper, darker, chocolate. It was an olfactory sanctuary, thick and comforting, utterly alien to the metallic tang of blood and rain clinging to him. Inside, bathed in the warm glow of under-counter lights, stood a woman. Flour dusted her apron like fallen snow, streaked across one cheekbone. Her dark hair was escaping a messy bun, tendrils framing a face flushed with concentration and perhaps the oven's heat. She was carefully placing dollops of dark dough onto a baking sheet, humming softly, utterly absorbed. The sight was so jarringly normal, so peaceful, it momentarily stunned Alessio more than the wound. The chime registered. She jumped, dropping the spoon. It clattered loudly on the stainless steel counter. Her eyes, wide in the warm brown of roasted chestnuts, snapped up. They widened further, taking in the drenched, disheveled figure, the pale face, the hand pressed desperately to his side, the dark stain blooming on his expensive white shirt despite the rain. "Oh my God!" Her voice was soft, laced with immediate concern, not the shriek of fear he might have expected. Compassion overrode shock. She didn't hesitate. "Are you all right? What happened?" She rushed forward, her flour-dusted hands hovering uncertainly. "Chaste," Alessio managed, his voice tight with pain and effort. The room tilted slightly. Hide, just for a moment." He leaned heavily against the doorframe, leaving a smear of rainwater and blood on the polished wood. "Here, sit down." She guided him to the nearest sturdy wooden chair, her touch surprisingly firm and competent despite her obvious alarm. "Let me see." She gently peeled his hand away from his side, her breath hitched at the sight of the torn fabric and the angry red graze beneath. Okay, hold on, first aid kit." She vanished into a back room, returning moments later with a white plastic box emblazoned with a red cross. As she knelt beside him, opening the kit with efficient movements, her nervous chatter began. Who did this? Was it them? The ones who run things in the shadows?" She didn't wait for an answer, dabbing antiseptic onto a gauze pad with slightly trembling hands. He hissed at the sting. Sorry. Men like that. Absolute monsters. Parasites, feeding on everyone else's fear and misery." Her voice vibrated with a deep, personal anger as she began cleaning the wound with meticulous care. The contrast between her gentle touch and the venom in her words was jarring. Alessio remained silent, jaw clenched. The pain was secondary now to the surrealism of the situation. The feared ghost, tended to by a furious angel in a bakery apron, while she cursed his very existence. "They think they own the city," she continued, her focus divided between the wound and her tirade. "With their violence and their intimidation. Especially him." She spat the word. The ghost. Volkov. Hearing his name, his real name, uttered with such pure hatred by this woman whose hands were saving him, sent a jolt through him colder than the rain. A phantom, they call him. More like a plague. A blight. She secured a clean bandage over the graze, her fingers deft. "Honestly," she muttered, almost to herself but loud enough for him to hear, the words dripping with contempt. "The world would be cleaner if someone just put a bullet in that Volkov bastard's head. Save us all the trouble." Each word landed like a physical blow. Put a bullet in his head. The irony was so thick, so brutal, it stole his breath more effectively than the wound. He stared at the top of her head, the soft curve of her cheek, the intense focus in her eyes as she finished taping the bandage. She meant it. Every vicious syllable. And yet, here she was, tending to him with unwavering kindness. The dissonance was profound, unsettling the core of his carefully constructed, ice-cold persona. He felt a dangerous pull, an unwelcome, sharp fascination with this woman who embodied everything his world destroyed. Warmth, light, uncomplicated compassion. She sat back on her heels, surveying her handiwork. There, that should hold until you can get proper help. You need stitches probably. She looked up at him, her brown eyes filled with genuine worry. Who are you? What happened? The lie formed instantly, smoothly, a survival reflex honed over decades in the shadows. Luca, he rasped, forcing a semblance of vulnerability. Luca Rossi, a common enough name. Freelance journalist, stumbled onto something. A story involving Viktor Kamenev. Guess he didn't appreciate the attention. He kept his gaze steady, projecting the image of a man caught in forces far beyond his control. Her eyes softened further, empathy warring visibly with the ingrained distrust he sensed simmering beneath her compassion. Viktor Kamenev? Oh God, you're lucky you got away. She shuddered. You can't go back out there tonight, not in this storm, not bleeding. Stay here until it passes at least, until you're sure they're gone. She stood, brushing flour off her apron. You're soaked. Well, it's not exactly your style. She disappeared again, returning with an oversized, soft gray t-shirt emblazoned with the cheerful logo of The Daily Grind and a steaming mug. Here, change into this. It's dry. And try this. My latest experiment. Midnight Mocha Crunch Cookie Blend. Needs work, but it's warm. Alessio took the shirt and the mug. The fabric was rough cotton, utterly alien against his skin accustomed to the finest silks and wools. The logo felt like a brand of her world, a world he'd violently invaded. The coffee aroma was deep, complex, with hints of dark chocolate and a surprising, subtle crunch. He sipped. It was rich, slightly bitter, incredibly comforting. He watched her as she busied herself cleaning up the first aid supplies, her movements economical and graceful. The silence stretched, filled only by the drumming rain and the hum of the refrigerators. The warmth of the coffee, the dry shirt, the unexpected safety of this little haven, it seeped into him, a dangerous thawing he hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever. He was captivated by her anger, her kindness, her competence, the sheer vibrant life of her. Dawn crept in, gray and tentative, the rain easing to a drizzle. The immediate danger had passed. Victor's hunters wouldn't risk daylight exposure. Alessio knew he had to leave. He stood, the borrowed bakery shirt feeling absurd yet strangely grounding. Thank you, Chiara, he said, her name tasting unfamiliar, almost sacred on his tongue. You saved me more than you know. Just be careful, Luca, she said, her eyes searching his face with lingering concern. Journalists poking around Viktor Kamenev, that's playing with fire. He nodded, offering a ghost of a smile that felt alien on his lips. I will. He turned to go, leaving the bloodied, ruined bespoke shirt crumpled on the chair where he'd changed. As he slipped out into the damp morning air, the door chime sounded again. He didn't look back, already vanishing into the city's awakening streets, the phantom once more. But he carried the scent of coffee and baking, the echo of her furious words, and the unsettling warmth of her compassion deep within his cold core. Minutes later, Marco, Chiara's longtime barista and friend, arrived early to start the ovens. He found Chiara scrubbing a faint bloodstain from the floor, humming softly, a thoughtful expression on her face. His gaze swept the shop, landing instantly on the discarded garment on the chair. He picked it up. Even soaked in rain and blood, the quality was unmistakable. Hand-stitched seams, Egyptian cotton so fine it felt like silk. Far, far beyond the means of any struggling freelance journalist. Chiara, Marco said, his voice low and serious. He held up the shirt, his eyes fixed on hers, filled with a deep protective worry. Who was that man, really? Chiara paused her scrubbing, following Marco's gaze to the expensive ruin in his hands. A flicker of doubt crossed her face, quickly dismissed by the memory of Luca's pain, his vulnerability. Just a journalist, Marco. Got caught in something ugly. She forced a smile, turning back to her task. He needed help. Marco said nothing more, but the worry didn't leave his eyes. He folded the ruined shirt with careful hands, the luxurious fabric a silent, damning testament to a lie. The seed of doubt was planted, deep in the fertile ground of the warm coffee shop, while the ghost walked away, irrevocably changed, already plotting his return. The scent of espresso and cinnamon lingered in Alessio's senses long after he'd returned to his sterile penthouse. Chiara's furious words, "Put a bullet in that Volkov bastard's head," echoed alongside the memory of her gentle hands tending his wound. The dissonance was maddening, intoxicating. He, Alessio Volkov, the ghost, who inspired terror with a glance, found himself inexplicably drawn back to the warm, dangerous haven of the daily grind. Not out of necessity, but a craving he couldn't rationalize. He returned the next afternoon. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and sparkling under a weak sun. He wore nondescript dark trousers and a simple black sweater, a calculated effort to blend into Luca Rossi's fictional world, yet his bearing, the controlled stillness, the watchful intensity in his gray eyes, still radiated an aura of contained power that made the few afternoon customers subtly shift in their seats. Chiara was behind the counter, demonstrating latte art for a young apprentice. She looked up as the bell chimed, her practiced smile faltering when she saw him. A flush crept up her neck, visible even against her olive skin. Relief warred with a confusing flutter of panic. He looked different. Clean, composed, devastatingly handsome in a way that felt like a physical blow. But the dangerous edge was still there, humming beneath the surface like live wire. Luca Rossi, freelance journalist. The lie felt flimsier in the daylight. "Luca," she managed, her voice slightly breathless. "You're looking better." "Thanks to you, Chiara," he replied, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the small space between them. He offered a small, genuine smile that transformed his face, softening the harsh lines, making her stomach do an unwelcome somersault. "I came to thank you properly, and pay for the shirt." He placed a folded bill on the counter, enough to cover a dozen bakery shirts. "Oh, that wasn't necessary," she protested, pushing it back, her fingers brushing his. A spark of static, or something else entirely, jolted through her. She snatched her hand away. "Just glad you're all right. Coffee? On the house? My experimental blend needs a guinea pig who isn't Marco." She gestured towards her friend, who was polishing cups nearby, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes sharp and watchful. "I'd be honored," Alessio said, taking a seat at the small table near the window where he could observe the street and the shop. He watched her move, the efficient grace as she ground beans, the focused intensity as she steamed milk, the slight frown of concentration as she poured. The simple act felt like a performance, intimate and mesmerizing. She placed the mug before him. The rich aroma of dark roast, chocolate, and a hint of caramel filled the air. "Midnight Mocha Crunch, version 2, she announced, a hint of pride in her voice. "Less crunch, more mocha depth." He took a sip, closing his eyes momentarily. "Perfect," he murmured, the word laden with a sincerity that surprised even him. "Balanced. The bitterness of the dark roast complements the sweetness without overpowering it, like finding harmony in opposites." He opened his eyes, meeting hers. Chiara felt pinned by his gaze. It was unnerving, this intensity directed solely at her coffee. No one had ever described her creations with such understanding. "You know coffee?" she asked, leaning slightly against the counter, forgetting Marco for a moment. "A little," he deflected smoothly. "Mostly as fuel. This is art." He gestured to the mug. "Tell me about the process, the inspiration." And so, tentatively at first, then with growing passion, Chiara talked. About sourcing beans, roasting profiles, the alchemy of blending, the frustration and triumph of perfecting a recipe. Alessio listened, truly listened, asking insightful questions, his gaze never leaving her face. He found an unexpected peace in her enthusiasm, a simplicity that was utterly foreign and deeply alluring. He watched the way her eyes lit up, the way her hands gestured animatedly, flour still caught under one fingernail. It was a glimpse into a world built on creation, not destruction. He became a fixture, always during the quiet lulls between the morning rush and the afternoon caffeine seekers. He'd order his coffee, sometimes one of her new pastry experiments. Espresso-infused biscotti, needs more bite. He'd offer critically, making her laugh, and they'd talk about the city's changing neighborhoods, about books, about justice. These conversations were minefields. "You think the police can really handle organizations like Kamenev's?" Chiara scoffed one afternoon, wiping down the counter with more force than necessary. "They're hydras. Cut off one head, 2 more grow, funded by drugs, extortion, human misery." Her voice vibrated with familiar, bitter anger. "It needs someone operating outside their rules, someone willing to fight fire with fire." Alessio stirred his coffee slowly, the spoon clinking softly against the porcelain. "Fire with fire often burns everything down, Chiara, innocence included." He thought of the blood on his hands, the collateral damage his orders had caused. Her brother's face, remembered from a cold surveillance photo years ago, flashed unbidden in his mind. Young, scared, foolish. He pushed it away. "Systems, however flawed, exist for a reason. Anarchy breeds worse monsters." "Systems protect the powerful," she retorted, leaning forward, her eyes blazing. Men like Volkov buy the system. They are the monsters, operating with impunity because they've corrupted everything. She spat his name, with such venom it was like a physical slap, even cloaked in Luca's identity. They deserve no quarter, no mercy. Alessio held her gaze, his expression unreadable. The irony was a constant, corrosive ache. And if someone like Volkov changed? The question was dangerous, probing. If they tried to step back, would the world they created even allow it? Or would the vacuum they left suck in something worse? Chiara faltered, thrown by the question. The intensity in Luca's eyes was unsettling. Men like that don't change, she said flatly, turning away to refill a sugar dispenser, her shoulders tense. The darkness in them is too deep. They're incapable of it. Her words were a verdict, closing the door on a possibility she couldn't even fathom. Marco watched these exchanges like a hawk. He saw the way Chiara's cheeks flushed when Luca arrived, the way she lingered near his table, the uncharacteristic animation in her face when they debated. He also saw the inconsistencies. Marco pointed them out one morning while prepping pastries, his voice low and urgent. He asks too many questions, Chiara, not just about baking, about the neighborhood, about rival businesses, about security, and his hands. Marco paused, shaping dough with rough, experienced fingers. They're not a journalist's hands. Not ink stains, but there are scars. Old ones. Knife fights, maybe. And that shirt— Marco, stop. Chiara sighed, though a sliver of unease pricked her. He's been through something traumatic. He's guarded. It doesn't make him a criminal, but the seed of doubt, planted that first morning, was sprouting tiny, unwelcome tendrils. On the other side of the city, similar concerns were voiced. Silas, Alessio's second in command, leaned against the polished ebony desk in the penthouse office. Boss, these visits, they're a vulnerability. Kamenev is licking his wounds, but he's not gone. If he connects you to that place, to her— Silas didn't need to finish. The threat was clear. She's a civilian, a liability. Alessio stared out at the city skyline, the twinkling lights a map of territories he controlled. Chiara's face, alight with passion over cocoa percentages, superimposed itself over the view. She's under my protection, Silas, he stated, his voice devoid of inflection but carrying absolute finality. Ensure it, quietly. The local crew, Rossi's old crew, make sure they understand the daily grind is off limits. Permanently. Any protection fees paid are to be refunded anonymously. Any trouble near that block disappears before it starts. Silas blinked, surprised. This wasn't just securing an asset, this was personal. Understood, boss. He hesitated. And the woman? Chiara Rossi? Alessio turned, his gray eyes meeting Silas's. They held a complexity Silas hadn't seen before. Conflict, weariness, something dangerously close to longing. She remains unaware of everything. The tension simmered beneath the surface of their growing connection. One rainy Tuesday, the shop was empty except for them. Chiara was experimenting with a new sourdough starter, her frustration palpable as the stubborn mixture refused to bubble. Alessio sat nearby, ostensibly reading a newspaper, but his attention was entirely on her. The comfortable silence stretched, charged with an unspoken energy. It's infuriating, Chiara burst out, slamming a floury hand on the counter. Such a simple thing, flour, water, time, and it just refuses to cooperate. Her outburst wasn't just about the starter. The weight of her past, the constant low-grade fear, the confusing pull towards this enigmatic, dangerous-seeming man, it all coalesced into a wave of frustration. Alessio lowered the paper. Some things need more than time, he said quietly. They need the right conditions, safety, warmth. He paused, choosing his words carefully, sensing her fragility. What fuels this fire in you, Chiara? This anger towards the darkness? It's more than just civic concern. He already knew. The guilt was a stone in his gut. But he needed to hear it from her, needed to confront the monster he was through her eyes. Chiara froze, her back to him. The question hung in the air, thick and heavy. Slowly she turned. The playful baker was gone. In her place stood a woman carved from grief and rage. Her eyes, usually warm brown, were dark pools of pain. My brother, she said, her voice low, trembling. Matteo. The name was a raw wound. He was 19, just a kid, got mixed up with the wrong crowd. Small stuff, you know. Running errands, thinking he was being clever, paying off some stupid debt. She wrapped her arms around herself as if suddenly cold. He made a mistake, took a package to the wrong place. A Volkov drop point. She spat the name like poison. They didn't ask questions, they didn't give warnings. Her voice cracked. They made an example of him, left him in an alley, broken. A tear escaped, tracing a clean path through the flour on her cheek. For a mistake, for being young and stupid and scared. Because Volkov demands absolute obedience, absolute fear. He's a monster. A soulless monster who destroys lives for profit and power. She looked directly at Alessio, her gaze burning with decades of grief and hatred. Men like Luca Rossi get caught in the crossfire. Men like my brother are the crossfire. Volkov deserves worse than a bullet. He deserves to know what it feels like to lose everything. The words landed with the force of a sledgehammer. Alessio didn't move, but inside he was reeling. He remembered the order. A minor courier network had gotten sloppy, disrespectful. A message needed sending. Make it clear. Harsh. He'd authorized it with cold detachment. Matteo Rossi had been a name on a report, a statistic in the calculus of control. Seeing the raw human devastation he'd caused etched onto Chiara's face, hearing the agony in her voice, it was a reckoning he hadn't anticipated, couldn't armor himself against. The guilt was a physical pain, sharper than Victor's bullet. He saw the monster reflected in her eyes, and for the first time truly recognized it. He looked away, unable to bear her gaze, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle leaped in his cheek. Chiara misinterpreted his silence, his averted gaze. See? Even talking about it, it's unspeakable, unforgivable. She wiped her cheek angrily. That's the world Volkov creates. That's why men like him can't be allowed to exist. Alessio found his voice rough as sandpaper. No, he agreed, the word tasting like ash. They can't. He meant it, in that moment, more than he ever had. The desire to be worthy of the light she represented, to somehow atone for the darkness he'd brought into her life, became a desperate, clawing need. He started making subtle changes, diverting resources from brutal enforcement, anonymously funding a local youth center in Matteo's name. Small, futile gestures against an ocean of blood, but he had to try. He returned a few days later, the air between them heavy with unspoken grief and the ghost of her brother. Chiara was subdued, cleaning the espresso machine with meticulous care. Alessio sat at his usual table, a chasm of guilt and unspoken truth widening between them. He was about to speak, to offer some inadequate word, when the shop door slammed open with terrifying force. 3 men stood silhouetted against the fading afternoon light. Not customers. Their faces were hard, eyes scanning the room with predatory focus. Viktor Kamenev's men. They'd tracked him. Recognition flared in the lead thug's eyes as they locked onto Alessio. There he is, the ghost thought he could hide in a fucking bakery. He drew a pistol, the sound obscenely loud in the quiet shop. Time fractured, Chiara screamed, frozen behind the counter. Alessio saw the gun, saw Chiara in the line of fire. Every instinct honed over a lifetime of violence surged forward, obliterating Luca Rossi in an instant. The man who rose from the chair wasn't a wounded journalist, he was death incarnate. He moved with blinding speed. A saucer from the table became a weapon, hurled with lethal precision into the gunman's wrist. Bone cracked, the pistol clattered to the floor. Alessio was already moving, a whirlwind of controlled fury. A brutal kick shattered a kneecap. An elbow strike to the throat dropped the second man gasping. The third lunged with a knife. Alessio caught the wrist, twisted with savage efficiency until the snap echoed, then drove the man's head into the counter edge. He crumpled, unconscious. It took less than 5 seconds. Alessio stood amidst the groaning wreckage of Victor's men, breathing hard, his eyes glacial, radiating an aura of terrifying absolute power. He pulled a sleek encrypted phone from his pocket, his voice a whip-crack of command in rapid, fluent Russian. Silas, Kamenev's rats found the nest. Clean up at the daily grind. Now, and find Victor. End this. He snapped the phone shut. The silence that followed was deafening, thick with the coppery scent of blood and spilled coffee. Alessio turned slowly. Chiara stood rigid, pressed against the back counter, her face ashen, eyes wide with dawning, horrified comprehension. The efficient violence, the cold authority, the foreign language, the name Volkov uttered by the thug, the pieces, the expensive shirt, his 2 knowing questions, his stillness that now seemed predatory, his reaction to her brother's story, crashed together with devastating force. The kind, wounded Luca vanished, replaced by the monster from her nightmares. Her voice, when it came, was a shattered whisper, trembling with betrayal and primal terror as she stared at the ruthless killer standing amidst the ruin of her sanctuary. You're him. A tear tracked down her cheek. The ghost. The word hung in the air, thick as spilled blood. Ghost. It wasn't just a name anymore. It was an accusation, a condemnation, a shattering of every fragile connection forged over steaming cups and tentative conversations. Chiara stared at Alessio Volkov, the man she'd cursed, the monster responsible for her brother's broken body in an alley, the phantom she'd wished dead while tending his wound, the man she'd stupidly, terrifyingly begun to care for. Betrayal, cold and corrosive, flooded her veins, followed by a wave of nausea so intense she swayed, gripping the counter edge. The scent of coffee, usually comforting, now mingled sickeningly with the metallic tang of blood and violence. The warm sanctuary of her shop felt violated, tainted. "Get out." The words scraped from her throat, raw and venomous. "Get out of my shop, get out of my life." Her eyes, moments ago wide with terror, now blazed with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You lying monster." Alessio didn't flinch, though her words struck deeper than Victor's bullet ever could. The icy mask of the ghost was back, but beneath it, Silas saw the devastation, a flicker of anguish in the gray eyes before they hardened. He understood the chasm he'd created. There were no words that could bridge it, not here, not now. "Silas will handle this," he stated, his voice devoid of inflection, the command of the underworld chillingly present. He didn't look at Chiara again. Stepping over the groaning thug, he walked out of the daily grind, leaving behind the wreckage of bodies, trust, and the fragile persona of Luca Rossi. The door chime sounded, absurdly cheerful, marking the end of an illusion. Chiara collapsed onto a stool, trembling violently. Marco rushed to her side, pulling her into a rough, protective hug. "Shh, Bambina, shh, it's all right, he's gone." But it wasn't all right. Nothing would ever be all right again. The image of Alessio moving with lethal, inhuman efficiency replayed in her mind, superimposed over the memory of his quiet intensity as he discussed coffee blends, the flicker of vulnerability when she spoke of Matteo. The dissonance was soul-crushing. She had nursed the viper, confided in the wolf, felt something for the devil himself. Self-loathing warred with the shards of grief and betrayal. Silas arrived minutes later with a team of efficient, silent men. They removed Victor's thugs with clinical detachment, cleaned the blood, righted the furniture. Silas offered Chiara a curt nod, his expression unreadable. "You're safe now. This won't happen again." The assurance felt hollow, a reminder of the power that had just shattered her world. When they left, the shop was physically restored, but the atmosphere remained fractured, poisoned. Back in the cold sterility of his penthouse, Alessio Volkov became a force of nature. The devastation Chiara's hatred had wrought was channeled into pure, ruthless fury. Victor Kamenev had overstepped. He had brought violence to her doorstep, shattered her sanctuary, exposed him in the worst possible way. This was personal, beyond territory, beyond business. The hunt was swift and brutal. Victor, emboldened by the near miss at the coffee shop, was found holed up in a dockside warehouse. Alessio didn't delegate. He led the assault himself, a chilling specter moving through the shadows. The confrontation was short, violent, and final. Victor Kamenev met his end, not in a blaze of glory, but on the cold concrete floor, Alessio's boot pressed to his throat, his gray eyes reflecting no mercy, only the cold satisfaction of eliminating a threat to what he had lost. "You touched what was mine," was all he said before the final, decisive act. But the victory was ash in his mouth. Standing amidst the carnage, the scent of gunpowder and death replacing coffee and chocolate, Alessio felt only emptiness. Chiara's words echoed. "Monster, soulless, deserves to lose everything." He looked at his hands, slick with blood that wasn't Victor's. He was the monster. He had authorized Matteo Rossi's death. He had built an empire on fear and violence. He had lied to Chiara. Every word, every shared moment built on a foundation of deceit. The image of her face, twisted in betrayal and loathing, was a wound that wouldn't heal. He couldn't have her and remain the ghost. The realization was a guillotine dropping on his old life. Days bled into weeks. Chiara moved through her routines like an automaton. Baking, serving coffee, cleaning, mechanical actions devoid of their usual joy. Marco watched her with deep concern, a constant, silent presence. The vibrant woman who debated passionately and experimented fearlessly was gone, replaced by a shadow wrapped in grief and confusion. Hushed whispers swirled through the city like autumn leaves. Volkov wiped out Kamenev's entire faction. Volkov's pulling back. Strange, less brutal. He's changed. The gossip was infuriating. Changed? Could monsters change? Did dismantling one evil absolve him of all the others? Did it bring Matteo back? Yet, a treacherous, tiny part of her, the part that remembered Luca's quiet intensity, his unexpected insights, the fleeting moments of vulnerability, whispered insidious questions. What if? Then the package arrived. Plain brown paper, no return address, left on the counter during the morning rush. Inside, no note, only a slim file folder. With trembling hands, Chiara opened it. Police reports, heavily redacted but chillingly clear. Surveillance photos showing her brother, Matteo, not as an innocent victim, but meeting furtively with known members of both Volkov's and Kamenev's organizations. Bank statements showing unexplained deposits. A transcript pieced together from a wiretap of Viktor Kamenev outlining a plan. Use the Rossi kid. Let him think he's playing both sides. Feed Volkov bad intel through him. When Volkov bites, we take the territory. And the kid. He's the fall guy. Volkov's men will handle the cleanup. Matteo hadn't just made a mistake. He'd played a dangerous, stupid game trying to outsmart Vipers. Victor had orchestrated the trap, using her brother as expendable bait. Volkov's men had delivered the final blow. Yes, executing the traitor as ordered. But the primary architect of Matteo's death, the one who had deliberately set him up to die, was Victor. The hatred for Volkov didn't vanish. He had still ordered the hit, still profited from the fear, but it became tangled, knotted with a renewed fury towards Victor and a crushing grief for her brother's recklessness. The world wasn't black and white, it was a murky, painful gray. The next day, a single, unmarked envelope slid under the shop door. Inside, a plain card with 2 handwritten words. I am sorry, for everything. No signature, none was needed. The stark simplicity of it cut deeper than any elaborate plea. It felt final. Rumors exploded. Not whispers this time, but seismic shifts in the city's underworld. Alessio the Ghost Volkov wasn't just laying low, he was dismantling. Key, notoriously brutal enforcement crews were disbanded. Lucrative but morally bankrupt operations, human trafficking rings, certain high-impact drug lines, were abruptly shut down or handed off to rivals under strict, new, less violent guidelines dictated by Silas. Properties were sold. It wasn't a retreat, it was a surrender. A voluntary demolition of his own empire. He was stepping off the throne, making himself terrifyingly vulnerable to the countless enemies he'd made over the years. The message was clear. The ghost was gone. The price of this transformation was everything he had built. Silas pleaded, argued. Boss, this is suicide. The jackals are circling, without the structure, without the fear. Alessio cut him off, staring out at the city he no longer controlled. Then let them come, Silas. The ghost is dead. Let them bury him. His voice held a terrifying calm. He had nothing left to lose but the chance, however faint, to someday stand before Chiara as something other than a monster. He owed her that much. He owed Matteo that much. The jackals didn't wait long. A faction led by a vengeful underboss, Kostya, saw Volkov's withdrawal as weakness, an opportunity. Their plan was simple: draw him out by targeting his only remaining vulnerability. Chiara Rossi. It happened at dusk. Chiara was locking up, Marco already gone home. A van screeched to a halt outside the daily grind. 3 men jumped out, faces masked, moving with purpose. They didn't bother with subtlety. One kicked the door open, shattering the glass pane Chiara had just cleaned. Where is he, Baker? Kostya snarled, grabbing her arm roughly. Where's Volkov hiding? Call him. Tell him to come, or this pretty shop becomes kindling with you inside. Chiara struggled, terror freezing her voice. Before Kostya could elaborate, a dark sedan slammed into the back of the van. Alessio erupted from the passenger seat, moving with the lethal grace Chiara had witnessed before, but now driven by pure, protective rage. Silas followed, gun drawn. Chaos erupted inside the coffee shop. Kostya's men opened fire. Alessio shoved Chiara behind the heavy espresso machine as bullets peppered the counter, shattering mugs embedding in wood. The scent of gunpowder and broken coffee beans filled the air. Alessio returned fire with terrifying accuracy, dropping one attacker instantly. He moved like a shadow, using overturned tables and chairs as cover, drawing fire away from Chiara. Silas engaged another thug near the door. Kostya, enraged, lunged at Alessio with a knife. Alessio disarmed him with a brutal twist, sending the blade skittering across the floor. But another thug, emerging from the wrecked kitchen entrance, fired. Alessio twisted, taking the bullet high in the shoulder. He grunted, stumbling back, blood blossoming dark on his simple black sweater, a stark contrast to the bespoke suit he'd worn the first night. Alessio! Chiara's scream tore from her throat, pure instinct, fear for him overriding everything else. Kostya saw his chance. While Alessio was momentarily stunned by the impact, Kostya scrambled for the discarded knife. He surged forward, aiming for Alessio's exposed back, as Alessio tried to bring his gun around on the remaining gunman. Time slowed. Chiara saw the lethal intent on Kostya's face, saw Alessio focused on the immediate threat, unaware of the blade poised to strike. The hatred was still there, a cold knot in her chest. But the thought of that blade sinking into him, of watching the life leave his eyes, it was unbearable. The memory of his hand brushing hers as he took a coffee cup, the intensity in his eyes when he called her baking art, The raw devastation on his face when she'd called him a monster, it all coalesced into a single, terrifying imperative. No, acting on pure, adrenaline-fueled instinct, she grabbed the heavy, cast-iron coffee grinder Marco used for special blends. It was absurdly heavy. She hefted it with both hands, stepped out from behind the machine, and swung with all her strength. Thunk. The solid iron connected squarely with the side of Kostya's head. His eyes rolled back. He crumpled like a sack of flour, the knife clattering harmlessly from his limp hand. Silence. Sudden and absolute, broken only by Alessio's ragged breathing and the drip of coffee from a shattered urn. Alessio had dispatched the last gunman. He turned slowly, his gun still raised, his gaze sweeping the scene. It landed on Chiara. She stood amidst the wreckage, overturned tables, shattered glass, spilled coffee grounds, flour dusting her hair and clothes like strange snow. In her hands, she still clutched the heavy grinder, her knuckles white. Kostya lay motionless at her feet, their eyes locked. Shock, disbelief, and a dawning, terrifying understanding passed between them. She had saved him. The woman who hated him, who wished him dead, had just saved his life. Blood seeped from his shoulder, staining his sweater, a counterpoint to the flour on her cheek. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing rapidly closer. Marco had called the police the moment he heard the gunfire and saw the van. Silas was already moving, securing weapons, positioning unconscious bodies. He met Alessio's gaze, a silent communication passing between them. When the police stormed in, guns drawn, they found a scene of carnage, but Silas, calm and authoritative, presented a narrative backed by hastily planted evidence, guns in the hands of Kostya's men, falsified documents linking them to Kamenev's remaining loyalists. He spoke of a rival gang attempting to extort the small business owner, of Mr. Volkov, a legitimate businessman, his lawyers would confirm, happening upon the scene and intervening to protect Ms. Rossi, getting wounded in the process. The lawyers Silas summoned arrived swiftly, smooth and implacable. Alessio was questioned, bandaged by an EMT on the scene, but released. The Ghost's network, even diminished, still had its uses. Kostya and his men faced charges. The immediate threat was neutralized. But Alessio's old life was irrevocably over. The power he'd wielded was gone, dismantled by his own hand. He stood in the center of the daily grind, now a true battlefield, the warm wood scarred by bullets, the glass front shattered, the air thick with the acrid smells of gunfire and spilled coffee, overlaid with the faint, persistent sweetness of chocolate chips from a spilled container. Chiara stood a few feet away, arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching him, her expression unreadable amidst the exhaustion and shock. He approached her slowly, ignoring the throbbing pain in his shoulder, the stares of the remaining officers. He stopped a respectful distance away, his usual imposing presence diminished, replaced by a profound weariness and a vulnerability that felt terrifyingly real. He offered no excuses, no justifications, no pleas. He met her gaze, the gray eyes holding a depth of sorrow and hard-won resolve she'd never seen before. "I am not him anymore," he stated, his voice low but clear in the ruined space. "The ghost is dead. I can never undo what I did. I can never bring your brother back, or erase the fear or the lies." He swallowed, the admission costing him. "But every breath I take now is to be someone better. Someone worthy of nothing," his voice cracked slightly, "except maybe your forgiveness. Someday." Chiara looked at him. She looked at the shattered glass glittering like diamonds under the emergency lights, the overturned table that had held their coffees, the blood staining the floor, his blood, spilled protecting her. She saw the man who had ordered her brother's death, and the man who had dismantled his kingdom, taken a bullet for her, and stood before her now, offering no defense, only a raw, painful truth and a promise. The hatred hadn't vanished, it was a scar that would always ache, but it was tangled now, with the impossible complexity of grief for Matteo's own choices, a terrifying empathy for the profound loss and pain she saw etched into Alessio's face, and the undeniable, life-altering truth of his actions for her. The world wasn't clean. Forgiveness wasn't a switch to flip, but amidst the bitter grounds of the past and the wreckage of the present, a faint, fragile scent of baking bread still lingered from the morning's batch, stubbornly persistent. A possibility, a terrifying, uncertain beginning. Her voice when it came was hoarse, scraped raw by tears and gunpowder. It held no sweetness, but the venom was gone. It held only exhaustion and a dawning, overwhelming need to deal with the tangible ruins surrounding them. "Start by helping me clean this up," she said, her gaze sweeping the devastated shop before finally meeting his eyes again. She paused, the name hanging in the air between them, heavy with all its history. The lie, the man, the monster, the ghost. Then, quietly, definitively, "Luca." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance. It was an acknowledgement. an acknowledgement of the devastatingly complex truth, of the blood and flour and broken glass that bound them, and the fragile, terrifying possibility of a road paved with bitter grounds, leading towards an unknown future. She turned, picking up a large shard of glass, her hands trembling only slightly. The first step. 2 years later, the scent wafting from the daily grind was richer than ever. Not just coffee and chocolate, but the warm, yeasty promise of freshly baked bread and the tangy sweetness of Marco's famous lemon tarts. Sunlight streamed through the large repaired front window, illuminating the bustling space, now expanded into the vacant shop next door. Laughter mingled with the hiss of the espresso machine and the clatter of cups. Behind the gleaming new counter, Chiara orchestrated the morning rush with calm efficiency. Flour dusted her apron, and a strand of dark hair escaped her practical ponytail, but her eyes held a warmth that went deeper than mere contentment. They held peace, hard-won, fragile, but genuine. A hand, large and bearing the faint silvery trace of an old knife scar near the thumb, slid a perfectly pulled espresso across the counter to a waiting customer. "Your double shot, Signora Rossi, just the way you like it." Chiara looked up, meeting Luca's gaze. The gray eyes that had once been glacial were now the warm, shifting color of weathered sea glass. They held an affection that still sometimes took her breath away, a quiet pride in this simple act of service. Gone were the bespoke suits. He wore dark trousers and a simple, well-fitting shirt under his own daily grind apron, slightly askew, as it always seemed to be. A streak of flour adorned his jawline. "Thanks, Luca." Chiara smiled, the gesture reaching her eyes effortlessly now. She nudged a small plate towards him. "Try the new batch. Extra dark chocolate chunks just for you." He picked up the still warm chocolate croissant, a small private smile touching his lips. It had become their ritual. Luca testing her newest creation. He took a bite, closing his eyes for a moment. "Perfection, moya Lyubov," he murmured, the Russian endearment slipping out softly, a language he rarely used anymore except with her. "The bitterness balances the sweetness perfectly, just like." He trailed off, catching her knowing look. "Just like us," she finished, her voice low, only for him. She reached across the counter, brushing the flour from his jaw with her thumb. The gesture was simple, intimate, a testament to the trust rebuilt grain by grain, like kneading stubborn dough. He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her flour-dusted knuckles. "Just like us," he affirmed. The ghosts of Matteo, of Victor, of the man known as the Ghost, still lingered in quiet moments. They didn't vanish, they were woven into the fabric of who they were now. Grief and guilt were threads in their tapestry, but no longer the dominant colors. Marco, wiping down a nearby table, watched them with a gruff affection that had replaced his initial suspicion. He saw the way Luca instinctively positioned himself between Chiara and the door, not out of paranoia, but out of ingrained protectiveness softened by love. He saw the way Chiara leaned into his quiet strength, no longer flinching but drawing comfort. Later, after the lunch rush subsided, Luca found Chiara in the small, sun-drenched office overlooking the expanded bakery section. She was poring over invoices, a frown of concentration on her face. He slid a mug of her favorite single-origin brew onto the desk beside her. "Remember," he said softly, leaning against the door frame, "when this place was just bullet holes and broken dreams?" She looked up, her frown dissolving into a soft smile. She took his hand, pulling him closer. "I remember a monster bleeding on my floor," she said, her voice gentle, devoid of the old venom. "And I remember the incredibly stubborn, infuriating man who decided to become something else, for himself, for me." She traced the scar on his shoulder, hidden beneath his shirt, a permanent reminder of Kostya, of the sacrifice that finally broke the dam holding back her ability to hope. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Best decision I ever made, walking into this shop that night." He paused, his gaze serious. "Even if you did threaten to shoot me," a genuine laugh bubbled out of her, bright and clear. "Well, look how that turned out. You got shot anyway, and I ended up married to you." He kissed her then, deep and slow, a kiss that tasted of rich coffee, dark chocolate, and the profound sweetness of a peace fought for and won. Outside, the coffee shop hummed with life. Their life, built not on the ashes of the past, but on the careful daily choice to nurture something better. It wasn't a fairy tale without shadows, but it was real. It was theirs. And the bitterness of the brew had finally, beautifully given way to the enduring sweetness beneath. He rested his forehead against hers. "I'd walk through fire for this, you know, for the smell of your baking, for the chaos of the lunch rush, for the quiet moments." He gestured vaguely at the invoices. "Even for the paperwork." Chiara laughed again, wrapping her arms around his waist, flour dusting his back. "Good," she whispered against his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. The heart of the man who had slain his own ghost. Because I wouldn't have it any other way, Luca. Not for all the chocolate in Belgium. Sunlight caught the simple gold band on her finger as she held him close, a small, perfect circle reflecting the light in their reclaimed sanctuary. The scent of baking bread, warm and hopeful, filled the air. Enjoyed the story? Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one.